Again, my name is Todd Chamberlain. I'm the Chief of Police here with the City of Aurora. I want to really thank you for your involvement and your participation in kind of detailing what occurred last Saturday night and letting the community be aware of what's occurring in and around their city. Basically, what I'm going to give you is an incident summary and an overview of what occurred, and then kind of get into more details or any specifics that you may have or would like to get clarified. On November the 28th at about 9:21, and again, we put this board over here to the side that kind of details that timeline. At about 9:21, community members made a Aurora 911 call for service at 920 Dawson Street. There was multiple calls for 911 reports of shots fired. Basically, in about a 90-second period, there were about 4 Aurora 911 calls for service to the Aurora Police Department. Officers responded to that location at 920 Dawson Street and made contact with some of the people who were reporting that incident. And what they learned is that an individual, a male white, wearing dark clothing, had come out of one of those apartments, went into the parking lot area, and started to fire multiple rounds in and around that apartment complex. Our officers, while they were gathering that information, at the same time, there was a search going on in and around the area to try to locate that individual, to get as much information as they could on where this individual was, what his actions were, and why his actions were unfolding the way they were. Right around the time of 9:50, the suspect was observed at a bus bench almost across the street and down a little ways from where the actual incident of the first shooting occurred. Our officers saw the suspect, or someone they believed to be the suspect. They made a tactical decision to coordinate behind an area of cover near an apartment complex. And again, as they were there, they got additional officers. They started to talk about less lethal de-escalation options, a myriad of different things to try to take this individual into custody peacefully and without further incident. Right around 9:55, the officers determined that the suspect had observed them in and around that area, so the officers made contact with them verbally and informed them that they were the police and to please go ahead and put up his hands and move towards them. That suspect almost immediately turned on the officers and fired multiple rounds in the officers' directions. Some of those rounds actually struck our police vehicles, and I wanted to show you this real quick over here to my left. It's an actual police vehicle that was out there that night, and as you can clearly see, one of the rounds fired by the suspect struck that hood, went into that vehicle. And I think what's really important to understand here is that there was actually officers in that police vehicle at that time. So the possibility for threat to them, for harm to them, was incredibly intense. Our officers immediately, upon being fired at by the suspect, returned fire. We had a number of different officers that returned fire. There was multiple rounds that were fired. As this exchange of gunfire occurred between the suspect and our officers, additional officers moved their vehicles for cover concealment and ultimately illuminated the area with their light bars and their sirens to make sure that people in the area were aware and that the suspect was aware of what was occurring. Our suspect continued to fire and he fled down the street. Gunfire continued to go between our officers and the suspect, at which point one of the rounds fired by our officers struck our suspect into his arm. He immediately dropped to the ground. Our officers then began to verbalize with him even more than what they had already done prior to the shooting. The officer didn't move, the suspect did not move any additional, so our officers went up, approached him, and took him into custody without further incident. When you look at this incident, again, I think it's really important to kind of look at the officer safety aspect to this, look at the community safety aspects of this, because I think without question there was a jeopardy there. We had a suspect that had definitely demonstrated a propensity for violence on that evening. Unprovoked by anybody in and around him, he was firing multiple rounds up into the air and in and around an apartment complex. Upon our officers making contact with him to investigate this incident further, he immediately began to fire on the officers. The officers used every tool that they could to de-escalate the situation, both verbally, multiple times asking him to stop, asking him not to move, asking him to lay down on the ground, put his hands where they could see him. Each of those requests were met with negative results. Again, the suspect immediately began to fire at our officers. So again, when you look at the potential or the possibility of injury to somebody that night, other than the suspect, it was incredibly, incredibly large. whether that was to our officers who were in this gun battle or whether it was to the community members that were in and around that area. Our officer safety, when you think of that and you think about what occurred, again, no law enforcement officers were injured in this event. And I think that's really important because when you look at this weapon that the suspect had, again, this is a weapon that has an extended magazine. This magazine that you see protruding out from this weapon, it's not disengaged from the weapon. This is actually a magazine that can hold up to 30 rounds of ammunition. So when you look at the weapons like that and what the suspect was using on our officers, using on in and around the community that we serve, the potential for harm was incredibly high. I really support and I appreciate the tactical awareness of our officers, how they deployed on this, what they did, what they moved in towards, and what they continue to stay engaged with even after shots were fired at them. I think it demonstrates an incredible level of professionalism and training that I want the citizens of Aurora to know is here to support them and to serve them. After the suspect was taken into custody, it was found that he had an extensive criminal history, and in that criminal history was, without question, a propensity for violence. He had been arrested prior for attempt homicide. He had also been arrested for robbery. Right now, I think the fact that you look at his immediate willingness to engage law enforcement unprovoked, it demonstrates really what type of individual they were unfortunately dealing with that night. The individual was also found, again, without question, to have served time, and he was also on parole, not at the time, but just coming off of parole. What we are going to do next and how this investigation is going to unfollow or continue to flow is basically the suspect was arrested that evening for 5 counts of homicide on a police officer. There's going to be a full and complete internal interview of administrative issues related to how this incident unfolded, what occurred, how it didn't occur. We are committed, without question, to complete transparency on every aspect of this investigation. And again, your participation here, I hope, demonstrates that, because I really need you to convey this message to the community about what happened and what actions occurred that evening. And then also this incident is going to, without question, be thoroughly documented both internally and externally. Right now, there is a collaborative effort that's going on between the Critical Incident Response Team, which is out of the 18th Judicial District Attorney's Office. They will do all of the review of this incident, verify the circumstances of what occurred, how it occurred, and why it occurred. And then we'll get results on that. What I also want to say is our department's commitment. We are fully committed to an internal investigation to review every aspect of this incident from the very beginning, or even prior to the beginning, all the way through to completion. We are also looking for complete and thorough, transparent communication with the community that we serve. And we want everyone to know that we are continued on public safety and public service. I also want to reaffirm to the community again, the department's committed to public safety. Our open communication on this incident and any other incident that we get involved in, again, I think that's imperative. And then also I wanted to say continued focus for our protecting our community members. In really brief words, again, we're lucky that no one was hurt on this incident. We're lucky that no one was killed on this incident. We're lucky that no families are at this time right now wondering what happened, how could this have happened in my community that I lived in. The officers responded again in a very quick order to an individual that was involved in some type of incident. He was firing multiple rounds. Our officers went, they communicated with the people reporting. They gathered information, details, specific facts about who was involved in this, why they were involved in it. And then more than just write a report, they searched that area to try to make sure that that community was safe. When they searched that area is when they ultimately came upon that suspect who was across the street and down the ways a little bit. After realizing what was occurring, they immediately said, well, how can we address this effectively and safely? They talked about a plan, they talked about less lethal, they talked about de-escalation. They communicated to this individual multiple times. This individual immediately responded to those efforts and that communication with gunfire. Our officers didn't shy away from that gunfire. Instead, they moved towards that gunfire as they followed that individual down the street as he fired more rounds. Ultimately, the suspect was hit in the arm and he went down. That, and I think that alone, is the only reason that we don't have more casualties in this event, that we don't have more community members that were impacted, or we have officers that were possibly killed in this event. So again, with that, I just wanted to let you know and be willing to ask her any questions that you have or any concerns you have, but I hope at what you see here, the individual, the diagram, the information, the shots fired, and the suspect weapons give you some clarity on what we were dealing with that night. Any questions, again, please open up.
Chief Chamberlain, do you have any information right now what led this guy to be shooting a gun in that parking lot?
All we know, and again, and this is really initial stuff, we are still deeply, deeply involved in the investigation, both internally and externally. So again, I can't get real deep on what all the circumstances were. But what we do know is that initially is that there was some type of domestic dispute or some type of dispute with a girlfriend. He left the apartment where that girlfriend resided and went outside into the parking lot, and that seems to be the time that he started to shoot the rounds.
Can you describe the environment? Did the apartments on both sides of Sable in close proximity restrict, or I'm sure your officers took that into consideration, did they restrict their response in any way to firing shots?
No, actually, it didn't restrict them. It's like I said, they actually evaluated the circumstances of what was unfolding. They evaluated the fact that they were getting shot at multiple times, and they continued to move forward and towards that suspect to stop that process. Again, I think when you look at the density of those apartment complex, that to me is very, very compelling. To have an individual who was out there at 10 o'clock, 9:30 at night, randomly firing rounds is one thing, but then to have that individual actually aiming at human beings and trying to shoot those human beings who are trying to stop that behavior, that is incredibly compelling, and it tells the story of what mindset this individual may or may not have been involved with at that night.
Did any rounds from either direction enter an apartment?
We had multiple rounds that struck vehicles that were parked along the street. Any of those vehicles at any time could have been occupied. So again, I think that is a challenging thing to think about. But as far as the apartment complexes themselves, right now I don't have any information specifically if those apartments were struck.
When you found that weapon, was it empty?
It was, yes. It was just in the state that you see it here.
So he ran out of ammunition?
That's what it looks like, yes. Any other questions?
Any idea if he was under drugs or alcohol?
Yeah, right now there's no information on that. That'll come out as the investigation continues to unfold.
I'm asking on the kind because I was there. There was another vehicle. Did officers fire through their windshield in response to this?
What we know right now in the initial investigation, and again, the interviews have not taken place yet, so I'm still a little apprehensive about getting too much into the weeds, but what I can tell you from the initial scene is that yes, it appears that as the suspect was firing rounds at the officers, it was at such a rate that they had to return fire actually through their vehicle. They couldn't exit their vehicle to get out and engage.
And I wanted to be clear, I think you just misspoke, but 5 counts of attempted murder of a police officer, right?
That's correct. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, 5 counts of attempted homicide on police officers. Yes. Anything else? Again, I just can't tell you how much I appreciate your presence here, how much I appreciate your involvement with this. We at the Aurora Police Department, without question, are striving to be transparent on every single event that our officers get involved in. This one, like all of them, are incredibly complex because you just can't understand what would drive an individual to do this. But all of these that we talk about, again, I think it's important that we articulate out to you and the community as a whole, is that we are committed to do our best to stop actions like this in the least impactful way possible. And the actions of our officers that night, I think, spoke volumes about the level of service that this department is committed to and what we want to do. It would have been very easy to have somebody firing this gun at you, and you wouldn't be one standing there. You'd be moving away in another direction. And not only one officer, but 5 of our officers actually moved towards that and tried to stop an individual before he caused any additional harm or any injury or any death to any community members in the city of Aurora. So to me, that is an incredibly important story to tell, and I appreciate your efforts in being part of that. So thank you very much.
Well, without getting specific, are you receiving adequate cooperation from the public and the people involved in this?
Yeah, right now we are still interviewing the actual individuals that were in the apartment at the time, getting more details about that. We are also canvassing the area. We're looking for CCTV, closed circuit television. We're looking for any other systems that were out there to capture this event, rings, anything else like that. So yep, it's still in the process. This is the very initial discussion right now. It's gonna be a lengthy and involved process to get all the facts and the details. Any other questions? Thank you very much. If you have any more, again, our PIOs are both here and in the back. They can supply specific information on name of the suspects and any other details that you may or may not need. Thank you so much for your participation, and I will see you again. Have a great day. Thank you.